Hey guys, tonight we drift toward a forgotten lake, nestled in the folds of Italy's volcanic crust, a place once cloaked in sulfurous mist, feared by ancient sailors, and whispered about in dusty libraries. You're standing at the edge of Lake Avernus. The air tastes metallic, thick with minerals. Your footsteps crunch over loose gravel and ash. Trees hang low, silent. Even the birds seem to keep their distance, as if they know better. This isn't just any lake. It's one the Greeks believed was a literal entrance to the underworld. You probably won't survive this ancient rumour, but don't worry, it's mostly metaphorical. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still with me, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where and when people are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the lakeshore, the water black as ink reflecting nothing. Lake Avernus isn't huge, just over 1 kilometre wide, but its history stretches deep. The name itself comes from the Greek aornos, meaning without birds. According to Pliny the Elder, birds flying overhead would drop from the sky, overcome by deadly vapours. So right off the bat, we're dealing with a place so spooky it allegedly had an anti-bird field, and you thought airport geese were bad. It lies near Naples, in the Campi Flegrei, Italy's lesser known but still quite feisty supervolcanic region. Here, the earth breathes through hidden cracks, releasing gases, heat, and the occasional existential dread. Picture steam rising from invisible pores in the soil, and you wouldn't be far off. There's a tangible heaviness in the air. You're not just walking beside a lake, you're flirting with a planetary pressure valve. The Greeks never settled this area heavily, but their poets and philosophers loved to project. They needed dramatic landscapes for their dramatic thoughts, and Avernus, with its foggy banks and simmering volcanic tension, was the perfect metaphor for crossing from life to death. Who needs CGI when nature provides the vibes? Of course, you might ask, wasn't the underworld supposed to be somewhere under? And fair. But ancient geography was a creative exercise. The earth was flatter, the gods were nosier, and cartographers sometimes just shrugged. If a lake made your dog faint and your torch go out, it probably led to Hades. Fringe theorists today still speculate about hidden catacombs and tunnels beneath the lake. A few even claim there's an uncharted passage down there, like Atlantis but steamier. Most geologists roll their eyes so hard they almost rotate out of the room, but they'll admit one thing. Volcanic lakes can have lethal build-ups of carbon dioxide. The 1986 Lake Nyos disaster in Cameroon is a chilling example. There, an invisible gas cloud surged from below the water and suffocated thousands. Spooky, yes, but also scientific. So maybe those Greeks weren't entirely off. As you circle the water, it's eerily quiet. No boats, no swimmers. Just a breeze that smells faintly of eggs and old myths. You imagine ancient sailors peering into this basin, seeing the ripples of some distant eruption or the aftershocks of tectonic rage, and deciding, yup, definitely hell. Today the lake is domesticated. There's a walking path, a few benches, even a parking lot. But if you close your eyes, really let your mind wander, you can hear the creak of ancient oars, the muttered prayers of those too brave, or too curious, for their own good. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly believed Avernus was a gateway to Hades, or if it was just literary flair that got wildly out of hand. Some say it was symbolic, others say entire rituals took place here, offerings made, words whispered to the wind in hopes the dead would answer back. But one thing's certain, no one ever built a gift shop on a boring lake. You move closer to the water's edge, and the first thing you notice is the smell. It's faint now, diluted by centuries and development, but you can still catch the trace if you breathe in deep enough. Sulfur. A strange, nose-crinkling scent somewhere between burnt matches and boiled eggs left too long on a summer windowsill. This, the ancients believed, was the breath of the underworld itself, escaping through cracks in the earth where it could find them. Lake Avernus didn't just look mysterious, it performed. According to early accounts, the air above it once shimmered with invisible poison. Birds, they said, would fly over and simply fall, feathers flailing in silence, their tiny hearts seized mid-beat by fumes they couldn't see. It's the kind of story that makes you glance up, just in case any unlucky pigeons are about to stage a reenactment. Modern science, of course, has its theories. The idea of volcanic lakes exhaling toxic gases is well documented. Under the right conditions, these bodies of water trap carbon dioxide and sulfur compounds beneath their surface, until a sudden shift, a landslide, or a temperature change releases them in a silent, deadly surge. You'd never know until the air didn't work anymore. Still, historians argue whether this ever actually happened at Avernus. The accounts are second-hand, vague, and most of them were written hundreds of years after the events they describe. Pliny the Elder, our favourite collector of dramatic facts and animal trivia, swore birds avoided the lake altogether, but he also believed beavers chewed off their own testicles to escape hunters, so grains of salt. Regardless, the myth endured. You can almost picture the drama, a temple priest dramatically gesturing toward a flapping bird that drops into the lake with a splash. See, it is the Underworld. Offer your figs and gold. Fear is a powerful motivator, and few things stir the human imagination like invisible death gas. There's also the psychological factor. This place felt wrong to them. Mist hung low, even in warm weather. The forest around the lake seemed too quiet. The water was dark, reflecting only a warped version of the sky. Add in the occasional belch of gas from the surrounding crater fields, and you've got a landscape tailor-made for dread. Some fringe accounts even suggest that strange lights were seen above the lake on moonless nights. Will-o'-the-wisps, ghostly lanterns, or just natural electrical discharges from the mineral-rich ground. Historians still debate whether these tales were metaphor, hallucination, or something more, inconveniently unexplainable. And then there's the silence. You can stand by Avernus for hours and barely hear a rustle. The wind is hushed here, as if the land itself is listening. One Renaissance poet swore he heard whispering from the trees, though he later admitted he might have been dehydrated and very emotional. You reach out and skim your fingers across the surface of the lake. It's cooler than you expect, startlingly so. No ripples follow your hand, as if the water chooses not to respond. You get the sense that if you dived in, you wouldn't come back up the same. It's worth noting that in Roman times, people didn't just fear this place, they used it. Wealthy families built summer villas nearby. Philosophers wandered the hills. Some accounts even suggest that generals made sacrifices before battle here, hoping to summon a favourable omen from beyond. It's like putting a picnic blanket next to a volcano and calling it vintage ambience. But perhaps the strangest part of it all is this. The idea of death clinging to a body of water isn't unique to Avernus. You'll find lakes and springs all over the world that were feared, worshipped, or avoided. It's as if humanity instinctively senses that still water isn't always still, that depth can deceive, that beneath the calm surface, something old waits. So you take one last deep breath, light on sulphur, heavy on speculation, and step back. Behind you, the path winds upward toward a ridge where poets once composed and priests once lied with flair. Ahead, the lake keeps its secrets, and you're starting to realize that's part of its power. You walk the path a little higher now, just enough to see the whole lake in one glance. From here, it looks almost serene, almost, a flat black mirror rimmed by soft hills and the occasional olive tree. But the calm is deceptive, and you know it. The ancients knew it too. One man in particular made sure everyone remembered. Virgil. Yes, that Virgil. The Roman poet with a flair for drama and deep existential metaphors. Around 19 BCE he wrote the Aeneid, Rome's great founding epic. And guess what? When his hero Aeneas needed to descend into the underworld, Virgil didn't choose some far-off magical realm. He picked a very real, very local place, Lake Avernus. That's right. Virgil made Avernus famous for all time by casting it as the literal back door to the dead. And because the Aeneid became required reading for Roman schoolchildren, scholars, priests and bored aristocrats for the next 2,000 years, the myth of Avernus was permanently installed in the public imagination. You might say the lake was poetically immortalized, which is nicer than turned into ancient horror fanfic. In Virgil's version, Aeneas doesn't just walk into the lake like it's a pool party. First, he visits the Sibyl of Cumae, a mystical oracle with the unnerving habit of writing her prophecies on oak leaves and letting them scatter in the wind. Helpful, right? With her guidance and a golden bow, basically the Underworld's fast pass, Aeneas descends into Hades through a cave at Avernus. The journey is surreal. Shadowy groves, shrieking souls, rivers with names like Lethe and Styx, and the occasional three-headed dog. Historians still argue whether Virgil was just riffing on older Greek myths, or trying to create a distinctly Roman cosmology. Either way, he succeeded. Avernus became shorthand for that liminal place between worlds, real geography repurposed as psychological terrain. You can almost hear Virgil chuckling to himself, what if hell was walkable? What if it was in your backyard? And let's be honest, the setting does most of the work. The crater, the sulphur, the unnatural silence. It's like Mother Nature left the door ajar and Virgil said, "Perfect, I'll take it." Later writers expanded on the idea. Medieval maps sometimes labelled the area Porta dell'Inferno, Gate of Hell. In Dante's Inferno, echoes of Virgil's description can be felt in the gloomy marshes and howling winds of the first few circles. And in case you're wondering, yes, Dante made Virgil his tour guide through hell, because nothing says trustworthy like a man who once wrote about a man walking straight into doom. But Avernus didn't just live in poetry. People actually went there, reenacting Aeneas's journey, hoping to find meaning or secrets, or at least a good story to tell. Think of it as ancient cosplay, with higher stakes and fewer capes. And then, there's the fringe stuff. A few modern researchers suggest that the cave Virgil mentioned may have actually existed, sealed now, or lost to time. One even claimed to have found a partially collapsed tunnel near the lake that led somewhere unusually warm. Theories abound. Ancient burial rites, Roman air vents, or a really, really committed tourist attraction. Historians still debate whether Virgil was inspired by a real descent point, or if he simply crafted the whole scene from vibes and mist. Of course, modern Avernus has mellowed out. A few hikers, a couple joggers, some indifferent ducks. But if you look closely, you might spot someone lingering at the lake's edge, holding a battered copy of the Aeneid, mumbling lines in Latin. You wouldn't be the first to think, that person's about to try something weird. And as you rest for a moment under the shade of a leaning pine, it hits you. This lake isn't really about geography anymore. It's about permission. Permission to imagine there's more than just water beneath the surface. That maybe, just maybe, the poets were onto something. The wind shifts again. You don't hear voices exactly, just the subtle sound of paper-thin boundaries rustling in the dark. You head down toward the base of the crater again, feet crunching on ancient volcanic gravel, and try to picture what it must have looked like 2,000 years ago. Not as a sleepy lake, but as a destination. Pilgrims came from miles away, dusty and wide-eyed, whispering prayers as they approached the waters. The Greeks had named it, the Romans built temples around it, and ordinary people treated it as a one-way voicemail to the dead. You probably imagine grand rituals and robed priests with flaming torches. But more often, it was something quieter. A mother kneeling by the reeds, asking for a message from her lost son. A soldier tossing in a token before leaving for war. A merchant hoping to curry favour with the gods below, because it's always nice to keep all your spiritual options open. It turns out, Avernus wasn't just literary fanfic. It became the setting for a very real kind of underworld tourism. Not the kind with brochures and hotel deals, but the ancient kind, blurry on details, heavy on incense. The line between religion, magic and mythology wasn't as sharply drawn then. You'd show up, do what the priest said, maybe tie a ribbon to a tree or drop a coin into the water, and hope something responded. There was a shrine to Proserpina nearby, Rome's version of Persephone, queen of the underworld. It was said that only women could enter her sacred cave and only during certain lunar alignments. Which sounds suspiciously like a clever way to prevent awkward questions from nosy senators. You can imagine a group of men standing outside trying not to look bored, while their wives disappeared into a hillside humming softly. Some accounts mention a cave that breathed, exhaling warm, damp air like a sleeping animal. That image stuck. Writers described Avernus as alive in some way, as if the land itself was listening, remembering, maybe even judging. Geologists, of course, point to volcanic vents and thermal pockets. But again, historians still debate whether this breathing cave ever really existed, or whether it was yet another poetic exaggeration, much like Aeneas's ghostly detour. Quirkier records suggest people brought strange offerings, not just gold or wine, but odd personal items, carved teeth, dyed feathers, woven dolls with black stones for eyes. Were these gifts for the gods or warnings? And who decided the underworld liked feathers? One especially weird tidbit: some Roman pilgrims would wear protective herbs around their necks before visiting Avernus. Rue, bay leaves, wormwood, plants thought to ward off evil or keep restless spirits at bay. Essentially ancient travel insurance. In case of accidental haunting, press bay leaf firmly to chest and remain calm. You sit on a low stone wall that probably wasn't there in Virgil's time, but it's easy to imagine it was. Behind you, there might have been a small altar, blackened with soot and age. Ahead, the still water glints like polished obsidian. You can picture the pilgrims standing where you are now, hearts thudding, convinced that one wrong step could echo into eternity. And here's the strange part: sometimes it worked. People felt something. Maybe it was the gas. Maybe it was groupthink. Maybe it was the overwhelming need to believe that death isn't just a full stop, that there's a door somewhere, that if you speak clearly enough, the other side might just whisper back. Some Roman authors describe oracles and visions at Avernus, not just from the famous Sibyl, but from random people. Dreams that arrive too vividly. Sudden knowledge of family secrets. One soldier claimed he met his dead father in a dream after sleeping near the lake. Though, to be fair, the ancient Roman military wasn't exactly known for high sleep hygiene. Today, tourists still come, though most don't know the full myth. They take photos, feed breadcrumbs to ducks, and walk the circular trail. But a few stop longer than others. They lean over the railing, stare into the black, and frown like something's on the tip of their tongue or the edge of their memory. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's the underworld remembering you. You follow the path along the rim, shoes slipping occasionally on loose stone, until you reach a small rise. From here, the entire crater stretches around you like the edge of an ancient bowl, one that's still warm. The reason? Avernus isn't just any old lake. It was born from fire. A volcanic explosion long ago carved out the basin you're standing in. What you see now, the calm water, the tree-lined edge, the stillness, it's just the afterglow of a much louder past. This entire region, the Campi Flegrei or Burning Fields, is technically a supervolcano. Not as famous as Vesuvius, but possibly even more dangerous. The earth here is restless. There are places where the ground rises and falls like a sleeping chest. There are vents where hot steam hisses out of nowhere, and beneath it all there's a massive chamber of molten rock that geologists monitor with the same anxious energy you use when watching your phone battery drop to 2% with no charger in sight. Back in Roman times, people didn't know about magma chambers and tectonic plates, but they did know the earth acted weird here. Earthquakes, sudden fogs, bursts of gas, even rivers that reverse direction briefly. And when you don't have science, you have mythology. Avernus wasn't strange because of geology. Geology was strange because it sat on the edge of the underworld. So yes, underneath the legends, there's a real reason why this lake earned its reputation. You're basically standing on a cosmic trapdoor. Even today, the air near the ground can feel warmer than you expect, especially in certain hollows. Some of the rocks are stained yellow, not from paint, but from sulfur deposits. Residue of a planet that still hasn't completely cooled. You bend down and run your hand along one. It flakes a little. The smell is faint, but distinct. Rotten eggs, old matches, a hint of underground secrets. Historians still argue whether ancient rituals around the lake were inspired by these natural phenomena, or whether the rituals came first, and people conveniently noticed the geography afterward. Either way, the volcano fed the myth, and the myth fed itself like a snake nibbling its own tail. There's even a legend that Avernus once boiled, literally. A traveller during the early medieval period swore he saw the surface bubble and steam like a soup pot, though modern scientists chalk that up to gas pockets rising during a quake. Still, it's a strong visual. Hell simmering right beneath a thin skin of water, just waiting to spill. Quirkier bits of lore say animals would sometimes refuse to go near the lake, dogs especially. One Roman author wrote that his hound howled and tugged away every time they approached the rim. Another insisted that horses refused to drink from it, no matter how thirsty they were. Whether that's true or just good storytelling, we'll never know, but it does give you something to think about when you notice that even the bugs seem scarce around here. You pause near a patch of scorched earth, nothing dramatic, just a dry patch with sparse vegetation, even though everything else around it is lush. Locals will tell you that no matter what you plant there, it won't grow. The ground remembers too much. And scientists? They'll shrug and say the mineral content or the acidity is off. No ghosts, just bad soil. But deep down, you know better. You stand in a place born from lava and legend, shaped by both heat and fear. The underworld myths didn't come out of nowhere. The land asked for them. It still does. You keep walking. The breeze picks up again, and for a second, it feels warm against your cheek, like someone or something is breathing nearby. You descend toward the southern slope of the crater now, drawn by a rocky overhang half covered in ivy. It's there, just above the waterline that ancient writers claimed a sacred chamber once existed. A cave, half natural and half carved by time and hands, where the Sibyl of Cumae once lived, or more accurately prophesied, while extremely high. Yes, this is where things take a turn from eerie to weird. The Sibyl was one of the most famous oracles of the ancient world, kind of like the Siri of 500 BCE, except instead of answering your questions with GPS and sarcasm, she inhaled volcanic fumes and delivered cryptic predictions in hexameter. Historians still argue whether she was a single person, a title passed down like a sacred job, or a concept entirely invented by poets with a flair for mysterious women. Whichever the case, her cave was said to sit near Lake Avernus, tucked into the stone like a waiting mouth. You peek inside what's left of a structure nearby, crumbling walls, mossy stonework, a lingering chill. Some believe this was the Sibyl's sanctuary. Others think it was just a Roman bathhouse. Either way, you feel watched. The Sibyl didn't just hand out fortunes, she terrified people. When Aeneas came seeking answers in the Aeneid, Virgil made her rant and rave like a woman possessed, shouting verses while the gods moved through her. And that's not even the weirdest part. Ancient sources describe her inhaling vapours that seeped up from the ground, possibly ethylene, or other naturally occurring gases, common in volcanic regions. In other words, she may have been in an altered state for every single prophecy. Imagine a prophet, pupils wide, rocking slightly, whispering things like, "Beware the one who swims backward," and then collapsing. Now imagine that people travelled for days just to hear that. That's either spiritual devotion or the earliest recorded hype train. Some Roman officials consulted her before launching wars. Others asked about crop success, marriage prospects, or the afterlife. She often replied in riddles, usually written on leaves. The leaves naturally blew away in the wind. If you're getting spiritually unhelpful librarian vibes, you're not wrong. Still, the Sibyl's fame grew. At one point, she supposedly offered 9 scrolls of prophecies to the Roman king Tarquin the Proud. When he refused her price, she burned 3. When he refused again, she burned another 3. Finally, he panicked and paid full price for the last 3. Classic scarcity marketing. These Sibylline books were stored in temples and consulted during national emergencies. Because when your empire's in trouble, obviously the solution lies in a dusty riddle written by a hallucinating cave dweller. One quirk that's often forgotten. The Sibyl was said to live for 1,000 years. That's because Apollo, the god of prophecy, offered her a wish in exchange for, well, attention. She asked for eternal life, but forgot to ask for eternal youth. Oops. So, legend says she withered into a tiny husk, eventually kept in a jar, her voice still whispering from inside like a haunted Bluetooth speaker. Creepy, and tragic. 2 genres for the price of 1. You rest for a moment on a carved block near where the cave might have opened once. It's just a crack in the hill now, sealed for safety, or secrecy, depending on how dramatic you're feeling. The air here is cooler, shaded and heavier with silence. You imagine the Sibyl standing just inside, face half lit, swaying slightly as she exhales the future. Locals today still tell stories. Some claim to hear a woman's voice near the cave on certain moonlit nights. Others say their electronics glitch out here. Phones that won't turn on. GPS that spins like it's trying to escape. Is it the magnetism of the volcanic rock? Or is the Sibyl still trying to reach someone? You stand, stretch, and glance at the lake again. It's quiet, but you get the feeling that if you asked a question, just one, it might echo longer than you expect. You're back at the water's edge now, closer to the reeds, where the air hangs a little heavier. The sun is lower, brushing the hills with gold, and shadows from the trees stretch toward the lake like cautious fingers. It's here that one of the strangest details in the myth of Avernus takes flight, quite literally. Dead birds. The ancient claim that birds couldn't fly over Lake Avernus has been repeated so often it's practically a slogan. Avernus. Come for the prophecy, stay because gravity said so. Writers from antiquity, especially our old friend Pliny the Elder, insisted that birds dropped from the sky, overcome by toxic fumes. Now, Pliny also believed thunder was caused by clouds bumping into each other, and that elephants feared mice. So, not always the most reliable source. But the myth stuck. Dead birds equal cursed place. It's math. So what's really going on here? Let's talk science. In volcanic regions, gases like carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide can seep up invisibly. They're heavier than air, and if they collect in depressions, they can suffocate small animals, especially birds that swoop too low. This is rare, but not unheard of. Lake Nyos in Cameroon released a similar gas cloud in 1986, killing more than 1,700 people and animals without a single flame or explosion, just a silent, invisible fog of doom. Historians still argue whether the bird deaths at Avernus were exaggerated, poetic metaphor, or a real but isolated event. Maybe a particularly active gas vent knocked a few birds out of the sky one spring, and the story spiraled from there. Or maybe a bored priest staged it for drama. Release the birds, now. Thud. Behold Hades. There's even a theory, fringe, but oddly plausible, that early travellers misinterpreted bird behaviour. The crater's warm-up drafts and strange air pockets could confuse a flock, causing them to spiral down or behave erratically. One traveller sees a few birds struggle in flight, and suddenly it's a death zone. Add a little dramatic lighting and boom, you've got a myth. As you walk along the path, you hear the rustling of wings. A crow swoops overhead, slow and smooth. It doesn't drop, it doesn't even wobble. You smile to yourself. Either the gases are gone, or the crow didn't read Pliny. But this bird business led to bigger questions in antiquity. If the lake killed birds, did it also affect people? And if so, why build temples and shrines around it? Well, part of the answer is bravado. Romans love testing fate. Build a temple on a cliff? Sure. Construct a theatre over a fault line? Absolutely. Build a port next to the entrance to the Underworld? Naturally. Avernus was eventually developed into a small harbour during the reign of Agrippa, Augustus's top naval architect. They even dug a tunnel connecting it to the nearby sea, because nothing says practical engineering like forcing your troops to march through a suspected hellmouth. But even during this Roman glow-up, the legend of the birds persisted. Pilgrims still looked nervously to the sky. Priests still hinted that the gods watched closely here, wings or no wings. And even in the Middle Ages, long after Rome fell and Latin turned to rumour, stories lingered of birds that refused to fly over the crater. Some claimed they made detours. Others said no nests were ever found in nearby trees. A Renaissance traveller wrote that he watched birds veer sharply away mid-flight, as if they remembered something they were never told. You pause beneath a crooked pine and notice a few feathers on the ground. Nothing ominous, just nature being nature. But it's easy to see how stories grow. One odd event, one unexplained death, and suddenly a myth blooms like fog on the water. You step forward again, the path crunching beneath your shoes, and you wonder, not if birds fell here, but if someone wanted them to. You move farther along the crater's rim, the sun now slipping behind a low ridge of trees. The shadows lengthen, and the lake, once gleaming, turns into a matte sheet of darkness. You're heading toward the ruins, not the grand kind with towering columns and heroic statues, but the quiet kind, crumbling stones half swallowed by earth and time. Here's where the story shifts again. Because Lake Avernus wasn't just feared or romanticized, it was also redeveloped. That's right. Emperor Augustus, ruler of an empire stretching across continents, looked at this rumoured gate to hell and said, "You know what this needs? Infrastructure." You arrive at what remains of a Roman temple complex, tucked behind a tangle of fig trees. Most of it is gone now. Just a few stubby columns, broken steps, and the base of an altar blackened with age and possibly incense. But once this place bustled with architects, priests, and labourers. Augustus had a vision to turn Avernus into a functional part of Rome's imperial machinery. You see, Augustus loved symbolism. He wasn't just building cities, he was building Rome's story, and folding a mythical lake into that story, very on brand. The emperor ordered the construction of the Portus Julius nearby, a military harbour meant to serve as the base for his western fleet. But the coast was tricky, so his engineers, led by Agrippa, connected Lake Avernus to the Lucrine Lake, and from there to the sea through a massive canal system. It was an underwater gateway of its own, this time for ships rather than souls. And that tunnel, the famed Grotta di Cocceo, a massive 1.1 kilometre passage carved right through the volcanic rock, straight through the cliffs, like an artery from myth to empire. It was large enough to move troops and supplies, lit by skylights punched into the rock above. Historians still argue whether this was more military strategy or theatrical gesture. Knowing Rome, probably both. You walk over a stretch of uneven ground that was once part of this ancient operation. Imagine the noise, hammers echoing, orders shouted in Latin, the clang of metal on stone. Imagine hauling material through a sacred lake and saying, "This is fine." It's like putting a parking garage beneath Stonehenge. Quirky detail. Some believe this construction angered the spirits of the lake. There are later legends about collapsed sections, sudden accidents, strange illnesses among the workers. And of course, the usual whisper, they dug too deep. But the Romans didn't stop there. Villas popped up nearby. Patricians built summer homes with views of the lake, as if to say, yes, that's the gateway to Hades, but the sunsets, gorgeous. Imagine sipping wine on your terrace while priests chant down the hill, and your neighbour tries to summon their dead uncle with a pomegranate and a goat's foot. The blending of the sacred and the secular here is fascinating. You had spiritual sites, military tunnels, and vacation homes all rubbing elbows, like a very confused zoning plan. And over it all loomed the lake, quiet and observant, watching yet another empire play God. Some of those villas may still lie buried. The land here rises and sinks over time. Bradyseism, they call it. It's slow, almost unnoticeable. But entire stretches of coast have drowned or resurfaced because of it. That's the nature of living on a sleeping dragon. Sometimes it rolls over. You lean against a fragment of old stone, probably part of a column once. The surface is cool and rough, scarred by time and maybe a little arrogance. Romans thought they could tame even death, dig through myth, reshape it, claim it. And in a way, they did. For a while. But the lake didn't go anywhere, and the myths, they outlived the empire. You listen again. The reeds rustle faintly. Somewhere, water laps against stone. You'd swear the lake is holding its breath. You follow the path around a bend, expecting something grand, another ruin, a statue, a temple stump. But instead, you find stillness. Just water. Flat, dark, unbothered. A lazy ripple here and there, the kind a tired breeze might leave behind. For all the fire and poetry, for all the talk of ghosts and gods and sulphur, the truth is, Lake Avernus is small. Strangely small. Barely over a kilometre across, it's more pond than portal. No crashing waterfalls, no thundering waves. It just sits there, perfectly round, perfectly quiet, like someone cut a hole in the earth and forgot to explain why. You half expect a sign that says, yes, this is it. We're as surprised as you are. And that's what makes it so unsettling. It's too calm. The kind of calm that makes you suspicious. Like the calm in a movie scene right before something slithers out of the shadows. You sit on a wooden bench that's seen better decades and stare at the surface. Nothing stares back. Ancient visitors said the lake drank light. Even on sunny days, they claimed, it refused to sparkle. Poets described it as colourless ink, a void that mirrored the sky without ever revealing its own depths. Modern tourists often say the same thing without realising it. It looks fake, or I thought it'd be bigger. Historians still argue whether the lake's eerie aura was physical, psychological, or just good marketing. Maybe it was the way mist hugged the crater in the morning. Maybe it was the strange stillness, or the volcanic gases, or the echo that bounced back slightly wrong. But once people were told it was the entrance to the Underworld, it became impossible not to feel that way. A few fringe theories take it even further. Some suggest the lake's near-perfect circle is no accident, that it was shaped or carved long before the Romans, possibly even by an earlier civilization trying to seal something away. There are no solid records, no archaeological evidence, just whispers, odd alignments on old maps, and one very speculative book from 1897 that was mostly ignored, until it mysteriously disappeared from every public library in southern Italy. You know, classic totally not a conspiracy vibes. You hear a soft plop, a fish maybe, or a stone dislodged by a lizard. It echoes much louder than it should. You lean forward, peer into the water, and again, see nothing. No fish, no plants, no sunken ruins, no helpful glowing eyes. Just dark, dense stillness. And that's the thing. For all its legend, Avernus gives you almost nothing. It doesn't perform. It doesn't gurgle or steam or groan. It just exists. Which, in a way, is worse. You imagine walking out onto a small boat alone, letting it drift to the centre. The silence would press in from all sides. Your breath would be the only sound. And underneath, who knows? Rock, sure. Maybe. Or maybe a long, slow descent into something else. Something that's been listening all along. One Roman author described a ritual where the officiant would stand still, arms raised, and say absolutely nothing for exactly 7 minutes, because words could disturb what rests below. That same ritual ended when the water lapped at the priest's feet of its own accord. Quirky, right? Totally explainable. Definitely not the creepiest thing you've heard all day. You take a final glance across the lake. The sun's mostly gone now, and the crater begins to cool, shadows stretching longer, fog creeping back in. The water's just sitting there, unchanging, like it's waiting for something, or someone. You. You continue around the perimeter, and the trees thin out just enough for a glimpse of something odd. A jagged anchor embedded in the mud. Rusted. Ancient looking. Probably moved here from somewhere else, or maybe dumped by a fisherman who'd had enough. But according to some legends, that anchor wasn't always so still. You've reached the part of Avernus's history where things go nautical, and weird. During the medieval period, a curious story began circulating among sailors, especially those who navigated the nearby Tyrrhenian Sea. They spoke of a cursed inlet near Naples where compasses spun, sails refused to fill, and men grew quiet without knowing why. That inlet, Lake Avernus, or at least what remained of its supernatural reputation. One tale stands out. A group of sailors, either pirates or traders, depending on which version you hear, decided to explore the lake on a dare. "We've conquered storms," one might have said. "We can handle a glorified puddle." They rowed across the surface, calm as ever. But when they reached the centre and dropped anchor, it didn't hit bottom. They waited, pulled, nothing. The chain just kept slipping. Finally, one man dove in and never resurfaced. No bubbles, no flailing, just gone. The crew panicked, of course. pulled up the anchor, it came back tangled with something slick and black, not rope, not plant. Just wrong. They fled. The boat was found days later, drifting empty near the Lucrine Lake. No crew, just a single helmet resting on the seat. Fiction? Almost certainly. But sailors are the original myth-makers. They saw maps as optional suggestions and treated geography like a haunted choose-your-own-adventure. When they said, the sea tried to eat us, you believed them. Historians still argue whether these tales are medieval misinterpretations of older Roman myths, or if they reflect a local effort to keep the legend alive through storytelling. One fringe theory claims that during periods of low seismic activity, a sinkhole beneath the lake briefly reopens, just enough to swallow something unlucky. And let's not forget the fog. Sailors hated Avernus's fog. Thick, clinging mist that rolled in without warning. One 15th century mariner swore he saw figures moving in it, men in Roman armour, silent and wet, standing on the water. When he blinked, they were gone, but his beard turned white that very day. Or so he said. Again, never let facts ruin a perfectly good maritime ghost story. There's a strange overlap here between geography and psychology. Lakes like Avernus are liminal spaces, places between land and sea, between fire and water, between myth and reality. And humans are deeply weird about liminal spaces. We fill them with whatever we're afraid to name. Pirates filled it with vanishing anchors. Priests filled it with restless souls. Today maybe we fill it with conspiracy videos and bad drone footage, but the instinct's the same. You glance at the lake again, still smooth, still quiet. If there's a cursed anchor here, it's not doing much at the moment, but your imagination fills in the blanks. You wonder what would happen if someone tried again, rowed to the middle, dropped a line, waited. Would they pull up nothing? Or something? You shift your weight and keep walking. The anchor in the mud is probably a prop or a leftover from a photo shoot. That's what you tell yourself. You don't turn your back on it right away though, just in case. You climb a little hill near the western shore, boots brushing past tufts of grass that refuse to grow straight. The terrain here is oddly uneven, not dramatic, just subtly wrong, like someone once folded the land in half and forgot to press it flat again. At the top, you find something unexpected. Concrete. Cracked, mossy, half-buried, but unmistakably modern. This is where the myth takes a sharp turn into the 20th century. Because yes, Lake Avernus, the alleged doorway to Hades, the sulphur-scented cradle of ghost stories and poisoned birds, was used during World War II as a military zone. Of course it was. Specifically, the area around the lake became home to hidden bunkers and tunnels used by Axis forces. Why here? Well, for one thing, it's naturally fortified. Crater walls, low visibility, and a general sense of nope that keeps people from casually wandering in. But it's also because the surrounding volcanic hills offered excellent camouflage. From the air, the whole place looked like a peaceful valley. On the ground, it bristled with secrets. You pass a warped metal hatch half covered in ivy. It's welded shut now, rust blooming across its face like brown moss. Some say this led to a munitions cache. Others claim it connected to the old Roman tunnels. Yes, the same ones Augustus had built centuries before. Historians still debate whether the Axis forces reopened these tunnels or just used their legend as intimidation. After all, this base is built on the bones of the Underworld. It's a pretty effective deterrent, even if it's just metaphor. But not all the rumours were metaphor. Locals whispered that strange noises echoed from the lake during those years. Thumps, metallic groans, lights that flickered beneath the water. One story insists that experimental sound weapons were tested here. Another insists there was a submarine base beneath the lake's surface, despite the lake being, well, very much not deep enough for submarines. But conspiracy doesn't require feasibility, it just needs atmosphere. And Avernus has that in spades. There's even an old military report that mentions thermal irregularities and compass interference in the area, something attributed to local geology. You can practically hear the shrug. Science doesn't want this lake to be weird. But the lake insists. Quirky detail. Some of the German soldiers stationed here refused to sleep near the water. One officer reportedly rotated his entire unit inland after a series of incidents involving lost equipment and sudden illness. The official record blamed poor hygiene and swamp gas, but some diaries tell a different story, of men who woke screaming, of missing boots found tied together in the trees, of dogs that refused to approach the lakeshore. And then there's the blackout. In 1943, during a power test at one of the local bunkers, the entire facility allegedly lost electrical function for 11 minutes. Radios died, generators stalled, lights out, no explanation. When they came back, one soldier was missing and never found. Again, could just be chaos, retreat, fog of war stuff. Or, a spontaneous field trip to the Underworld. Today, the remnants of those bunkers lie forgotten under layers of brush and rumour. You kick a rock aside and reveal the edge of a concrete foundation, barely visible. The war came and went. The stories stayed. A few locals claim the area still messes with phones and compasses. Tourists sometimes post about weird cold spots, but no one can prove anything. And that's the most chilling part. For all the satellites and scans, for all the history books and YouTube explainers, Avernus still keeps its secrets. You sit for a moment on a slab of reinforced concrete. Once part of a military installation, now just a weird bench. The sun has dipped low, casting orange light across the lake. Somewhere down below, beneath centuries of stone and story, you imagine tunnels twisting like veins. A military base, a mythic gate, a volcanic ghost, a lake that refuses to be just one thing. And you wonder, not for the first time, what it remembers. The air is cooler now, with the kind of chill that feels more psychological than physical. As you move toward the northeastern rim, the plants grow stranger. Patches of moss where there shouldn't be any. Flowers blooming late into autumn. Reeds standing perfectly still even when the wind clearly moves the trees above them. You're in the area locals call La Palude dei Sussurri, the Marsh of Whispers. Not an official name, obviously. It doesn't show up on maps, but the people who live nearby, the older ones especially, know exactly what you mean if you say it. They might laugh a little, shake their heads, then casually change the subject. This stretch of the lakeside is said to be cursed, or blessed, depending on who's talking. You pass a wooden post with no sign on it, just an old bit of red string tied around the top, for luck, or warning, or both. One of the most persistent stories here isn't about emperors or epic poems, it's about frogs. Yes, frogs. Stay with me. There's a regional myth, dating back at least to the 1600s, that says frogs near Avernus don't croak like normal frogs. They croak backward, not literally playing the sound in reverse, but making a noise that no one can quite replicate. Some say it's like a croak being sucked back into the throat. Others say it's more like a whisper that never quite finishes the word. Either way, it's weird enough that more than one naturalist came here to try and record it. They never caught anything conclusive. One described the sound as glitching. Another wrote that he felt sick to his stomach every time he heard it. No one stayed long. Frogs aren't the only anomaly. Fish caught in Avernus, rare as they are, have sometimes been described as wrong. Too many fins, bulging eyes, movement that doesn't match their body shape. A local fisherman once claimed he pulled in a carp that never opened its mouth, and yet made a clicking noise. When he showed it to someone the next morning, it had disappeared from his bucket. Of course, science says volcanic gases, mineral imbalances, oxygen depletion. Maybe. But historians still argue whether the reports are exaggerated folklore, or if there's something, let's say, peculiarly adapted to the lake's subterranean energy. Quirky detail. A Renaissance-era priest once declared the lake to be a gateway for fallen thoughts. That's right, thoughts. He claimed the whispers in the marsh weren't ghosts or echoes, but the residue of dark ideas cast off by people in moments of fear or grief. These waters remember, he wrote, not just souls, but sins. Needless to say, he wasn't invited to many parties. You crouch near the marshy edge. The reeds are so tightly packed they almost hum. You close your eyes, listen. No frogs, no fish. But maybe, just maybe, you hear the faintest murmuring, like breath through a hollow flute. You try to tell yourself it's wind, or your own imagination catching up with you. But you don't linger. Avernus, for all its stillness, doesn't appreciate being stared at for too long. As you rise and move on, you notice one last oddity. A small wooden box tucked between two rocks. Inside it, a piece of obsidian, a dried fig, and a strip of red cloth. A homemade offering. Modern. Recent. Someone else has been here. Someone who still believes. You leave the marsh behind and follow a gravel trail that loops upward, skirting the crater's rim one last time. The sky is turning that deep, almost metallic blue that signals nightfall, and lights are beginning to flicker on in the far-off town below. But the lake remains dark, still, watching. This part of the path is where the modern meets the mythical most directly. You're walking alongside tourists now. Not literally, it's late, and the place is empty, but the evidence is here. Footprints in the dust, faded directional signs, a wooden kiosk with nothing inside but cobwebs and a sun-bleached flyer, offering guided ghost tours, the real gates of Hades. And yes, Avernus has ghost tours now. Of course it does. The guides, you learn, are usually actors, or amateur historians, or both. They wear robes, carry lanterns, and recite Latin phrases with suspicious fluency. And while some play it for laughs, don't anger the gods unless you're prepared to buy them espresso. Others really lean in. Whispers. Candlelight. Carefully placed sulfur tablets hidden near the reeds for that authentic underworld scent. Tourists love it. Reviews say things like, unnerving in the best way, and my phone glitched out when the guide started chanting. Whether that's because of volcanic magnetism, or a cheap Bluetooth speaker buried under a rock is beside the point, the atmosphere sells. Some guides even claim to have had their own experiences. One says he saw footprints appear beside his own in the morning dew. Another insists a recording picked up an extra voice whispering in Neapolitan dialect, one that didn't belong to anyone on the tour. Yet another swears that during a school group visit, a student fainted after claiming a woman in white touched his shoulder. Spoiler, there was no woman in white. You pass the empty kiosk and laugh a little under your breath. It's easy to be skeptical in the daylight. Harder now in the fading dusk, when every branch crack sounds like a whisper, and the air starts to feel just a bit thicker. Historians still argue whether these ghost stories are modern fabrications, ancient legends with updated costumes, or spontaneous folklore sprouting naturally in a place already steeped in myth. What's clear is that the narrative needs them. People keep coming. Not for the lake, really, but for the idea of it. And the guides? They're storytellers more than anything. They stand where emperors once built, where poets once scribbled, where priests once muttered into sulphur-scented wind. And they continue the chain. They keep the myth alive. Because let's be honest, the idea that we live in a world where the underworld might be accessed via a forgotten lake in Italy is more comforting than the alternative, that it's all just rocks, gas, and bad cell reception. Quirky moment. One guide was fired for adding his own personal spin, insisting the lake is a time portal where the souls of gladiators argue about Instagram. To be fair, that tour did sell out for a few weeks. You climb higher now, the final bend in the trail bringing the entire crater into view again, and it hits you. How many feet have walked this rim? How many voices, ancient and modern, have tried to explain this still, dark water? The guide might be gone. The flyers might be tattered. But the story is still here. Waiting. Shifting. Rewriting itself every time someone whispers, "Do you think it's real?" You don't answer. Neither does the lake. You reach the final stretch of the crater trail, the rim flattening out as it wraps back toward your starting point. The stars are visible now, soft pinpricks overhead, and a low breeze has returned, brushing your arms like a reminder that you've been walking alongside something old, something patient. You stop beside a crumbling stone bench, worn smooth by weather and worry. From here you can see almost everything. The dark water, the softly glowing town in the distance, and the faint outline of the hills beyond. But your mind drifts somewhere else entirely, into stories, into screens, into the way Lake Avernus has become more than a place. It's a recurring character in the mythology of modern media, because Avernus hasn't retired. It's found a second or 15th life in films, games, and books, and every time it shows up, It brings the same baggage. Sulphur, mist, doorways to death. It's become a symbol, an aesthetic. The lake as mood board. In video games, it's often a level, usually spooky, sometimes on fire. One survival horror franchise used Avernus as a backdrop for a hospital-turned-prison-turned-laboratory, with vague demonic vibes. The lake never actually appears. You just hear about it in patient files. That's how it works now. A name, a symbol, an echo. In fantasy novels, Avernus is more literal. A cursed body of water that eats light. Or a portal opened only by spilling blood under the full moon. Or a lake that reflects not your face, but your greatest regret. Yikes. Historians still argue whether these modern versions preserve the original myth or simply recycle its mood. One camp says Avernus has been flattened into a horror trope, just another spooky lake. Another insists that myth evolves with culture, and the lake's endurance proves its symbolic power. As usual, both sides are slightly right and slightly insufferable. Even in cinema, Avernus shows up. One cult Italian thriller from the 1970s filmed dream sequences here. Actors in gauze robes wading into the water while reciting Latin prayers backward. The director later claimed he never got permission to film there, and that 3 crew members got sick after the shoot. The footage is grainy, surreal, and vaguely cursed. A more recent art film depicted Avernus as a literal border between life and memory. The protagonist rows across it to speak with his dead brother, then forgets the encounter the moment he reaches shore. A bit on the nose, sure, but it won awards. And then there's the internet. Forums filled with posts like, "I camped at Lake Avernus and heard voices," or "Is the Underworld real? My dog won't go near this lake." One user claims he found coordinates online that lead to a locked steel hatch near the shore. Another says they swam across the lake at midnight on a dare and forgot the entire next day. Probably just dehydration. Or not. Quirky bit. A music producer once claimed he recorded ambient sounds at the lake and turned them into a sleep album. Track titles included Gate Fog, Below the Surface, and Something Watches. It did not do well commercially, but it's still floating around in the shadowy corners of YouTube if you're curious. And here you are. Not in a movie, not in a game, just standing at the edge of the story, listening, watching, feeling the layers of fiction and history collapse into one long, winding narrative that somehow always leads here. The lake doesn't glow. It doesn't bubble. It just is. And somehow, that's enough to keep it alive. You descend once more toward the lake's edge, where the trail narrows into a soft curve of packed earth and gravel. The lights of the town have faded behind the crater walls. It's just you now, and the dark water. You've come full circle. You slow your pace. This is the part the stories always avoid, the leaving, the walk back, the moment when you step away from the myth and wonder if anything truly followed you. Lake Avernus looks no different than it did when you arrived. Still round, still quiet, still pretending to be just a lake. And yet, after all you've seen, whispers, gas, poems, frogs that refuse to cooperate, you can't shake the feeling that something subtle has changed. Maybe the air is heavier. Maybe the trees are listening more closely. Or maybe it's you. Because you know too much now. You think back to the mannequins of Roman priests, standing still and silent in the fog, to Virgil's verses, threading through caves and across the page like spells, to the sulphur, the birds, the temples, the submarines, the frogs, the ghost tours with malfunctioning microphones and conveniently timed breezes. It doesn't matter whether you believe any of it. What matters is that you felt it. Historians still argue whether belief is required for a place to be powerful. Some say myth is only as strong as the number of people who repeat it. Others say places like Avernus simply are, whether we chant their names or forget them completely. You pause by the water. There's no reflection. Not because the water's too dark, just because it's not offering one. And it's here, in this quiet moment, that you remember the last line of that obscure priest's diary, the one who claimed the lake collected fallen thoughts. He ended with this: "Do not ask the lake for answers unless you're ready to accept its silence as one." You step back. The reeds rustle faintly. Somewhere a fish breaks the surface and disappears again. A final breeze rolls through the crater, low, long, like breath, and then fades. You take the path that curves uphill toward the exit, your steps slower, more deliberate now. Behind you, Avernus settles, no splash, no voice. Just silence, folded neatly around everything you didn't see. And so you leave the lake the way everyone does, changed slightly, but unable to explain how. Not afraid, not sure, just quieter. Let your body soften now. You're walking slowly, farther from the crater, the trees gently parting above you as stars settle overhead. The air is cooler here, more open, the ground steadier beneath your feet. Every step takes you farther from that deep silent water and closer to the comfort of your own breath. Inhale gently, let it out just a little longer than you expected. Your thoughts might still echo with the rhythm of the lake, the folds of history, the stillness that never quite stopped being strange. But you're safe now. Whatever stories drift through that crater stay behind. You're not meant to carry them, just to witness for a while. Feel your hands unclench, your shoulders loosen, your jaw release. You're done wandering for the night. There's a warm bed waiting just beyond the last bend in the trail. A soft blanket, a quiet room, maybe a fan humming low, steady as a priest's chant or a Roman footstep. Maybe just the sound of your own breath, gentle, familiar, pulling you away from all this. You've walked the shore of the Underworld. You've heard the whispers and kept walking. You've listened, and now it's time to sleep. So close your eyes, let the stories fade. The lake will still be there in the morning. And tonight, all it asks is that you rest.